I have learned so much about language learning in general from the experiences I've had tutoring people languages. I got a request, a Q&A from someone to talk about some tips on how to tutor languages. Now, a little disclaimer, I'm not a professional tutor. I don't have a degree in education. I am merely excited about language learning and I want to share that with the world. So without further ado, let's dive into some tips if you want to get started in teaching languages this year. First of all, where can you tutor languages? If there are any language schools in your area, if you have a degree or the necessary certifications, you can apply to tutor there. There are also websites you can sign up on, for instance, Verbling or Italki. You can register as a community tutor, which is a lot more informal, or you can be a professional tutor, but you need to provide certification. You can also just tutor on your own. I started out word of mouth. I was tutoring Afrikaans and English to Korean students in South Africa. We were quite close to the Korean community because my mom started out as a tutor. When she moved overseas, I took over some of her students and gradually built up a user base, if you want to call it that. In a community, if there's good word of mouth, they will start referring other students to you. In university, I was also tutoring Korean and Japanese to beginners. This is because Korean and Japanese tutors are very scarce in South Africa, very hard to find. And it actually just started out by a few of my friends saying, hey, I know you speak Korean, could you please help me? And I was like, sure, let's, informally start. And then that kind of spread by word of mouth and people said, okay, I'm willing to pay for this, or can you give me some of your worksheets, documents, and so forth. Also, just advertise yourself online. You can start an Instagram page, a Twitter account, a Facebook page, a YouTube channel. If you want to start making videos on YouTube teaching your language, after a while, people might start asking and saying, hey, do you do one-on-one tutoring? Okay, now that you have a place to tutor, whether it is word of mouth, a friend of yours, a website, or just one-on-one online, let's talk about your first lesson. For my first lessons with my students, I consider this kind of a level test. It is to get to know the student, for them to get to know me, and for me to understand their level more. It is impossible for me to gauge what someone's level in a language is just by them saying, hey, I'm intermediate in so-and-so. You have to do some sort of a level test or conversation practice with them in the first lesson. And tell them that you need to manage expectations. You don't want a student to come in expecting some in-depth grammar lesson when you are just doing a conversation or level test. So communicate that with them, say, hey, this is our first lesson, we're just gonna get to know each other, tell me about your language learning goals, and let's figure out your level and where we wanna get you to. I create my own level tests. It's just a mixture of reading, writing, speaking, and if it's a language that has a different script like Korean, I also test their spelling and writing in that as well. Remember not to put pressure on your student to perform. This is really not a test per se, it is just a gauge to see where they are at. So welcome them and say there are no wrong answers, just do your best. This is for us to understand each other more. Next, let's talk about resources. It is okay if you want to use a textbook to work through with your student. However, I prefer making my own lessons. I used to print them out when I was tutoring in person, but now I just do it on Google Docs. And what I like about Google Docs is that you can see each other working on it. So I can just click and say, okay, do you see where I am now? Here's this word. We usually start off the lesson with just a conversation and I'll write down the sentences as I'm saying them. This also depends on their level. If they're intermediate or advanced enough, they won't need to read those basic sentences. And it's okay to pull from a few different resources. Maybe you want to get an article online that you copy paste with the source that you guys can read together. Give your student enough time to speak. That is so important. I find that there are lots of tutors that talk over their student, overtake the lesson. Create an opportunity for your student to practice their speaking and make sure they feel safe to speak around you. If you as the tutor are constantly going to interrupt the student fixing their pronunciation while they're in the middle of the sentence, they might become scared or nervous to speak. At least let them finish to the end of the sentence and then say, great effort, here's one word we can focus on. In terms of pronunciation, if you want to fix students' pronunciation, something I do on my Google Docs is every word that they have pronounced wrongly, I will highlight in a specific color so that at the end of the lesson we can go through the document and work on pronouncing these words properly. In terms of lessons themselves, I like to do a lot of example sentence and sentence builders. Something I did with my students in South Africa is I would take flashcards in 3 or 4 different colors, just colored paper, and I would put nouns on one color, verbs on another, and subjects or objects on another. And I would mix these cards together, tell them to pick out one from each pile and make a sentence. So they might pick up the word fish, friend, and eat, and they'd have to make the sentence, my friend eats a fish, for instance. So these are fun, interactive sentence building activities where you are facilitating but giving your student the control to make their own sentences. You're not just providing sentences for them to memorize like this, you are letting them create their own. This makes them feel proud of their progress. For more advanced learners, you can also tell them to take 2 words from each pile to create longer or more complex sentences. Okay, now the next one that I like to do with my students is board games. This is a little hard to do online. Back in person, I used to create my own board games. We would just roll a die, and every position that you would stop would be a conversation prompt. So what did you do today? What's your favorite holiday? Tell me about your dreams. Who's your best friend? Any kind of conversation prompt you can think about. You can also adjust this to your student's interests. If you know your student is interested in baseball, make a board game talking about baseball. I like to make my students feel seen and heard. So anytime I'm creating a weekly lesson for us, I would put their name in the example sentences or in the homework. So if their name is James, I would always make example sentences like James is going to the shop, just so that once they get there, they're like, oh, hey, that's me. And they feel that you are putting in this extra mile and effort to customize the lesson for them. Something else you can do is situational dialogues. I used to do this in person, so I would take my student out. I lived near a mall. We would just walk to the mall and talk about things like, hey, this dress looks nice. What do you think about it? Or let's walk into the supermarket and talk about all the groceries we see. You can do this virtually just by opening a picture and doing a little role play and pretending you are in a supermarket, for instance. See how you can be creative and think about situational dialogues that your student might use in real life. How often should you give lessons? This is completely up to you and your student and your schedule. I like to give weekly lessons because it's easy to track a student's progress and there's not too much of a gap between the times we see each other, and generally there's enough time to give them homework. Yes, I do give homework. It's always good to give homework because a student can do really well in a lesson. Things can be in their short-term memory, but then the next lesson they may have forgotten things. Homework helps them process what they've learned in the lesson, and it helps you pick up on mistakes that you may not have seen in the lesson. And finally, let's talk about keeping and losing students. It's important to manage your students' expectation in terms of pricing and hours. You might feel comfortable to have a student book 4 lessons at a time for a month. They might not have the time or finances to make that kind of commitment. So be a little flexible. If you only want them to pay for 1 lesson a week, just communicate that with them. Remember to treat your student like a friend. Be warm, friendly, communicative to them. This will help them come back. Nobody likes a scary teacher. Nobody likes someone who is overly critical. Remember that you are going on a journey with them. You are building a relationship and a connection with the student over time. So be proud of their progress and treat them like a friend. And lastly, don't be upset when your student might need to cancel or no longer take lessons anymore. This is just human nature. It might not be a reflection of your teaching style. Your student just might have other priorities in life, and that happens. I hope this video has been helpful for you and that you find all the students you want to get in this new year. Happy New Year to everybody and good luck on your language tutoring. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye!